Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are attempting something pretty monumental, I have to say.
I think that's putting it mildly.
We are wrestling with one of the deepest, most, foundational riddles in all of Western thought. What is the true nature of difference?
Right. And it's important to be clear from the start. We're not talking about simple distinctions.
No, not at all. This isn't about, the difference between a red apple and a green apple.
Exactly. We are going way deeper. We're looking at a stack of philosophical source material that really tries to deconstruct the very act of distinguishing one thing from another.
At the level of being itself.
At the level of being. And that's where the real tension comes in. The sources argue that we as humans have this deep, almost instinctual need to classify everything, to organize.
To tame the world.
To tame it, yes. The moment we look at something and say A is different from B, we've already started that process of domestication.
We take this raw, inherent wildness of difference and we put it in a box.
We confine it. We limit its power.
So that's the existential itch we're trying to scratch today, isn't it? We crave these neat categories, these fixed boxes. But the reality, the raw, dynamic act of distinction itself is messy.
It's unpredictable and it's radically creative. So our whole mission here in this deep dive is to try and uncover this pure concept of difference in itself.
To rescue it from this millennia-long confinement.
Where it's just been treated as, not this or the opposite of that.
Okay, so to do that, we have to start by confronting the villain of the story.
And our sources are very dramatic about this. They actually name a philosophical villain, the system of organic representation.
Organic representation, it sounds so natural, so harmless.
It's designed to sound that way. It's the common sense approach to knowledge that just completely dominates our thinking, from, basic high school biology all the way to how we structure huge fields of science.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. If this is the cage we need to escape, what are its bars? What rules does it impose that stifle true difference?
Yeah. It's a system that's built on coherence and manageability. In this model, differences are only seen as valid or even thinkable if they're comparable, if they're measurable.
And if they fit neatly inside a bigger concept.
Precisely. Think of the classic biological classification. A species has to fit perfectly into a genus. The difference has to serve the identity of the group.
And the sources say this system rests on 4 pillars, or shackles, as they call them.
The 4 shackles of mediation, that's the language they use, and it's so powerful, it really does imply a kind of philosophical bondage.
So what are they? We need to know what we're breaking free from.
The 4 are identity, opposition, analogy, and resemblance.
Okay, so identity is the first one. That's the foundation.
Identity is the foundation. It provides the big overarching concept, the genus, the general idea that has to stay constant for the whole system to work. It's the container.
It holds everything together.
It keeps the container firm. Then you have opposition, which manages the differences inside that container. Differences are only allowed to exist as contraries, A versus not A.
So they're always defined by what they're not, in relation to that shared identity.
Always. They never get to just be. Third is resemblance. This deals with the objects themselves, making sure that even though they're distinct, they share enough features to be grouped together under the same concept.
Okay, that makes sense. Identity, opposition, resemblance. What about the 4th shackle? Analogy.
Analogy is the glue that holds the whole structure together when the differences get too big to be contained in a single concept. It lets you relate the most general concepts, the categories themselves.
So it's like saying, well, the structure of an ecosystem is analogous to the structure of a marketplace.
Exactly. It allows you to map one structure onto another. The sources put it very plainly. Difference is mediated to the extent that it is subjected to the 4-fold root of identity, opposition, analogy, and resemblance.
So if I only ever see difference through that lens as a comparison, I'm basically forcing it to just reinforce some prior identity.
You are. You're completely missing its primary creative force.
You're just looking at the surface.
You're looking at surfaces, and the stakes here they're profound. If we don't overturn this system, the sources argue we stay trapped in a world of mere surfaces, false movements, and conserved mediocrity.
Conserved mediocrity.
Why miss the real, intensive reality of change because we're only looking at predictable, manageable differences? We lose the ability to think genuine novelty.
Okay, the challenge is set. Let's break those shackles. Let's step into that raw, unsettling world of unmediated difference.
Right. So when we talk about difference outside of this system, we're leaving behind what you might call empirical difference.
We're not talking of the measurable space between blue and yellow on a color wheel anymore.
Not at all. We're moving into a realm where difference is a pure act of distinction.
An act.
Yes. Something which distinguishes itself unilaterally. This is a huge concept we have to sit with for a moment.
Unilaterally, so one-sided.
One-sided. It's a sheer radical act of determination where something differentiates itself from a ground, but, and this is the crucial part, that ground does not distinguish itself back in return. The distinction only goes one way.
The source material gives us this incredibly visceral image for this lightning.
Yeah.
How does that help us understand this unilateral distinction?
Think about it. Lightning distinguishes itself violently from the black sky. It cuts a path. It's pure determination.
Okay.
But the sky doesn't distinguish itself from the lightning. The sky just remains the ground. It continues to espouse that which divorces it, as the text says.
It's an act of divorce where one party doesn't even acknowledge the separation.
Exactly. It's an instantaneous, non-reciprocal event. The lightning is the determination. The sky is just the field that allowed it to happen.
That brings up the language the sources use. They call this pure determination, cruelty, or monstrosity. Why such aggressive, almost moral language for a philosophical concept?
Because it's an act of violence against the order of representation. Representation demands balance, reciprocity, neat categories. This unilateral act is a philosophical attack on the structure of identity.
It's the moment the ground rises to the surface and dissolves the form.
That's the phrase. This isn't the sleep of reason producing nightmares. This is the insomnia of thought. Because thought itself, when it performs this act of pure distinction, makes difference. And that difference, untamed by identity, is monstrous to our traditional way of thinking.
I can see the artistic connection they're making here with Goya and Redon. Their work is often grotesque, distorted.
Yes, and the distortion isn't just about mismatching parts. It's about the dissolution of form. The abstract line in Goya's etchings or Redon's charcoal drawings. It participates in the blackness, the ground, all the more intensely because it distinguishes itself without the ground pushing back.
The background becomes aggressive.
It acquires an autonomous existence, and the form, the face, the figure just decomposes. This is why the source makes that incredible claim. There is no sin other than raising the ground and dissolving the form.
That's the original sin of philosophy, defying the rule of neat classification.
Right. So historically, the very first job of philosophy, after that first lightning strike, was to rescue difference from this monstrous chaos.
Tame the beast.
Precisely. And that brings us to what the sources call the Greek propitious moment. The huge historical effort led by the ancient Greeks to reconcile this wild, monstrous difference with the safe confines of the concept in general.
And the chief architect of this grand project of domestication was Aristotle.
Aristotle. He's the one who laid down the rules for a well-behaved difference. For a difference to be considered the greatest and most perfect measure in teleos, it had to follow the rules of contrariety.
And it had to stay within a genus.
It had to be contained. This is the very definition of specific difference.
Can you give us a really clear example of that in the Aristotelian model?
Sure. Let's take the genus animal. That's our stable identity. We then divide that identity using differences that act as contraries. For example, with feet versus with wings. Or the classic one, rational versus irrational.
So the rationality that defines man within the genus animal is a specific difference.
And Aristotle calls it maximal and perfect. But, and this is the core of the critique, it's only maximal in a relative sense. It's maximal only relative to the identity of the genus it's serving.
So it's not the biggest, most intense difference possible. It's just the most useful difference for keeping the classification system tidy.
That's the critical insight. Our sources point out this fundamental confusion in Aristotle. He confuses the task of creating a concept of difference in itself, with the task of inscribing difference within the identity of a concept.
He's not trying to understand difference. He's trying to find the difference that best serves identity.
It's completely subservient, and this whole system forces him to use those shackles we talked about. He had to deal with differences that didn't fit neatly, like generic difference, the difference between huge categories, or individual difference, which is too small.
So how did he handle those? The outliers?
His whole philosophy of difference becomes this complementary double inscription. Specific difference is handled neatly inside the genus. But generic difference, the really big differences between categories, that's managed through analogy.
The fourth shackle.
Analogy is the fiction that lets him relate completely disparate concepts without ever admitting that difference itself might be the fundamental reality. It's a tool that only works when you're reflecting on the identity of a concept, always making sure identity gets the last word.
It really does sound like a beautifully constructed prison. No matter which way he turned, difference was always serving the master, identity.
It was chained to representation. It was always mediated, always subordinated, and
Yeah.
it was just waiting for liberation.
Which is where our discussion has to pivot. That liberation brings us to our second section, the ontological proposition and the univocal voice. If Aristotle was the great domesticator who proposed the radical alternative,
The alternative is singular and it's profound. Our sources declare that there has only ever been one ontological proposition capable of escaping this trap.
and that is,
Being is univocal.
okay, let's do a concept decoder here, because this feels like the engine room of the whole argument. What does it mean for being to be univocal?
Univocity, which is a concept really championed by the medieval philosopher Duns Scotus and then picked up by people like Spinoza, is this radical idea that being existence, the simple fact that things is spoken of in one single common sense across everything.
Everything. God, creatures, substances.
Everything. And this is the part people often misunderstand. The single voice does not mean everything is the same. It doesn't mean everything is identical.
So it's not erasing difference. It's validating it.
It is validating it. It means that all the individuating differences, all the intrinsic modalities are affirmed in that single voice. Being is equal for all things, but the things themselves are profoundly unequal.
So being is said of difference itself.
That's the critical line. Difference isn't what carves up a pre-existing identity. Difference is the content of being. The differences are the realities, and they are all affirmed equally in their existence.
That's a fundamental shift in the philosophical power structure.
Yeah.
If being is univocal, how does that change the way existence is distributed or measured?
It requires a completely different system of distribution. We have to contrast Aristotle's model, which was based on judgment and fixed concepts,
Right.
with the system that univocity demands. We're talking about sedentary distribution versus nomadic distribution.
Sedentary distribution.
No.
That sounds like the logic of property lines, of fixed laws,
Well,
logos.
It is. It operates through judgment and analogy. It's all about dividing up that which is distributed. It sets fixed proportional limits and territories. It asks how much of this concept belongs to this class and how much to that one.
It's a land survey for ideas.
Perfectly put. Now, the alternative is concept decoder, nomadic distribution, or nomos.
And this operates in a totally different way.
Completely different. There's no fixed property, no enclosure, no predetermined measure. It's not a division of what is distributed. It is a division among those who distribute themselves in an open, unlimited space.
So instead of a central government carving up a field, it's more like a horde of animals spreading out to cover the entire plain. The space is divided just by how they deploy themselves in it.
That's a perfect description of how it works. This nomadic mode ensures that things are deployed across the entire undivided expanse of univocal being. It's why this form of distribution is sometimes called demonic.
Demonic.
Because it doesn't respect the established lines. It operates in the intervals and the leaps over barriers. It confounds all the fixed categories.
I remember the line from Oedipus. Which demon has leapt further than the longest leap? The leap itself is a kind of transcendence.
And that brings us to the ultimate measure of existence in this system. It's not limit, it's power. Univocal being is equated with crowned anarchy.
Crown anarchy, I love that.
In this system, the measure of a thing is not its boundary, its pares, but its inherent power, its capacity to act. The real question is whether a being leaps over its limits by going to the absolute limit of what it can do. This hubris, which traditional philosophy condemned, is now affirmed.
So a being, no matter how small, if it fully realizes its own potential, pushes itself to the absolute limit of its capacity, it achieves a kind of fundamental equality with any other being.
That is the profound equality of being. Everything is equal in the sense that univocal being is immediately present in everything without any need for mediation, even though the things themselves exist in profoundly, creatively unequal ways within it.
It's an immediate presence, a totally different kind of hierarchy based on realized potential, not on a fixed category.
And that sets the stage for how this idea unfolds in modern thought.
So now we trace this radical idea of univocity through the thinkers who dared to affirm it. This is the history of affirmation. We're seeing how this idea evolved from something abstract and neutral into a really active creative force.
The jury really starts in the medieval period with Duns Scotus, the subtle doctor. He's the one who first puts forward this proposition that being is univocal. But for him, this univocal being was neutral. It was indifferent to all the big distinctions of metaphysics, like finite versus infinite, or singular versus universal.
Why the neutrality? That seems a bit counterintuitive if the goal is to affirm difference.
He was walking a very fine line theologically. He was trying to avoid the charge of pantheism.
Ah, okay. The idea that God and creation are the same thing.
Exactly. If God, who is infinite, and creation, which is finite, share the same concept of being too literally, you risk collapsing that distinction. So by making being abstract and neutral, he could say they both participate in it equally, but still remain distinct.
And he came up with some key distinctions to make this work, right? The first one is formal distinction.
Correct. Formal distinction is crucial. It's a distinction that is real, it's in the object itself, but it's not a numerical distinction. It's a distinction between essences. So, for example, in God, his wisdom and his goodness are formally distinct. You can think them separately, but they don't divide him into parts.
A real distinction without a real separation. And the second one, which seems more relevant to what we're after, is modal distinction.
Modal distinction is all about the relationship between that univocal being and its intensive variations. A good way to think of it is like different degrees of whiteness. Each degree is an intensity. It varies the mode of whiteness, but it doesn't change the essence of whiteness itself.
So these are the individuating intensities that Scotus allowed to exist under his neutral concept of being.
Right. Scotus made being univocal, but he kept it contained by making it abstract.
So the next step is to inject life back into it. This brings us to Spinoza, who takes this neutralized concept and makes it an object of pure affirmation.
Spinoza just strips away all the neutrality. For him, univocal being becomes identical with a single, universal, infinite substance. His famous Deus of natura, God or nature.
God or nature. So being becomes expressive and immanent.
Absolutely. And to make this work, he reorganizes the distinctions he inherited from Descartes. For Spinoza, what Descartes called real distinctions are only formal. These are the attributes, like thought and extension, that express the substance's essence. And what were numerical distinctions become modal, the modes, which are just finite things existing as degrees of power.
So this framework lets him say that being is spoken in a single sense for both the infinite substance and all the finite modes.
Yes. The attributes are common to everything, but the modes are all determined as these unique, unequal, intense degrees of power, each one trying to deploy all of its power within its own existence.
Spinoza's system really makes univocity expressive. But there's still a kind of hierarchy there, isn't there? The modes still seem dependent on the substance.
A slight dependency remains.
Yes. To truly get to that crowned anarchy we talked about, to fully affirm difference, you need one more step, a complete categorical reversal.
And that brings us to the third most explosive moment, Nietzsche.
Nietzsche and his doctrine that turns everything on its head, the eternal return.
This is the necessary conversion. Under Nietzsche, being has to be said of becoming. Identity has to be said of that which is different.
Identity can no longer be the first principle, the fixed genus. It has to be a second principle, a principle that has become, and it revolves entirely around the different.
The eternal return is so often misunderstood. People think it just means the same boring things happening over and over again forever, which sounds like the ultimate conservatism.
That reading misses the entire philosophical point. The source is adamant. The eternal return does not bring back the same. It starts from a world where all previous identities have already been dissolved, where difference is already affirmed.
So returning itself becomes the returning is the only same of that which becomes. It's the becoming identical of becoming itself. It's an identity that's secondary, an identity of difference, affirmed only in the act of its own return.
And it's not just a thought experiment. It's a practical, selective test.
It's the ultimate test for the will to power. The eternal return makes the difference because it selects among differences. And it's a terrifying mechanism because it eliminates all the average forms. It's a sieve that rejects anything timid, anything that just wants to conserve itself, anything mediocre.
So only the extreme forms return, only the things that are deployed to their fullest power.
Only that which is excessive, singular, fully realized. Only that which can will its own return gets to return, because it transforms itself and affirms its own existence in that very act. This ensures that the only thing that is the affirmed difference.
This sounds like the perfect realization of that crowned anarchy. It is a hierarchy, but it's one based on affirmation and power, not on origin or category.
Exactly. The problem was never hierarchy itself, but the type of hierarchy. This new structure subordinates the identical to the different. The eternal return is the active, decisive realization of univocal being in the real world of time and becoming.
Okay, so we've established this incredible affirmative power of univocity. But now we have to look at how traditional reason, even when it tried to escape the tight box of organic representation by using the infinite, still ended up serving identity.
That's right. We're moving into what the sources call infinite representation, or even orgiastic representation. These are systems that look like they embrace chaos and infinite movement, but deep down, they're still searching for a solid ground.
And we see this failure in two absolute giants of modern philosophy, Hegel and Leibniz.
Both introduce the infinite, but in opposite ways. And both ultimately serve the same master, the principle of identity and sufficient reason.
Let's start with Hegel. He takes difference and pushes it all the way to contradiction. He finds the infinite in the infinitely large.
Hegel discovers the infinite as this theological maximum, the being, than which nothing greater can be conceived. And he insists that difference has to be pushed to the point of absolute contradiction. For him, contradiction is the engine of movement. It's the indwelling pulsation of self-movement.
It sounds incredibly dynamic. It sounds like it's embracing negativity.
It does, but the critique here is devastating. It exposes what the sources call the terrifying conservatism of the dialectic.
How so?
Because the dialectical process, even with its infinite movement, functions like a gigantic memory. It conserves everything through negation and reconciliation. Every conflict, every contradiction, every difference is mediated and overcome, sublated into a higher identity.
So it's all just reinforcing the identity of the whole in the end.
Hegel's circle is just the infinite circulation of the identical by means of negativity. Difference, even at the limit of contradiction, just ends up serving to reinforce a predetermined identity. It's the ultimate domestication through memory.
So if Hegel embraced the infinitely large, Leibniz came at it from the other side, with the infinitely small.
Leibniz's motivation was largely theological. He wanted to keep God and creatures separate but still connected. So he introduces the infinite as the infinitely small. And this leads to his concept of vice diction, which is really key to understanding his system's limits.
Okay, let's clarify vice diction. It sounds pretty technical.
In vice diction, the unequal, so the finite thing, includes the equal or the universal law in the case what it excludes in essence. The classic example is differential calculus. The infinitesimal relations, the dx, are basically nothing compared to the finite x. They're just pure differences.
But Leibniz uses them to define universal laws.
He uses the convergence of these infinite series to define universal relations, like the derivative, which expresses the essence of a function independent of any particular values.
So he admits there's a pure, raw difference, but he immediately captures it by forcing it to converge on a single point.
He captures it. He links it to the negative of limitation. His whole system depends on the principle of sufficient reason, on God's choice of the best of all possible worlds, which forces all these divergent series to converge toward a pre-established harmony.
So whether it's Hegel's contradiction or Leibniz's vice diction.
Both systems still invoke a foundation. They give the principle of identity an infinite value. And difference remains, subordinated to identity, reduced to the negative, incarcerated within similitude and analogy.
It's a bigger cage, but it's still a cage.
An infinitely large cage, but a cage nonetheless.
Which brings us to this crucial refusal that defines this whole philosophy of affirmation. The absolute rejection of that famous axiom, omnis determinatio negatio.
All determination is negation.
Exactly.
The sources insist that difference in its essence is affirmation. That's the object of affirmation. So we have to refuse that Hegelian idea that difference is just negativity serving to confirm an identity. Negativity has to be secondary, not primary.
This creates a really dramatic split in how we say yes to existence. The sources contrast two ways of affirming.
The affirmation of the slave, or the ox, and the affirmation of the master Dionysus, or Zarathustra.
What's the difference?
The slave or the ox only affirms by shouldering the burden of the negative. They bear all the values through suffering. To affirm is to expiate, to pass through division, to remember all your debts and overcome them. It's that terrifying conservatism. Again, it conserves everything through memory.
But the master's affirmation is different.
Completely. For Dionysus, for Zarathustra, difference is primary. It's light, it's aerial. To affirm is to discharge, to lighten the burden. The no negation is just a shadow, a nachfolge. It's a consequence that follows in the wake of an affirmation that was too strong to contain itself.
And this leads to a whole new kind of negation of the negation, right? It's not a synthesis.
No, it's an active denial of what should not return. The new formula is everything which can be denied is and must be denied. This works through waste and active forgetting. It's a violent centrifugal force that expels all the average forms, everything that can't pass the test of eternal return,
It's an active purging of the mediocre.
to ensure that only pure difference remains.
And this entire project, this active forgetting, this pure affirmation, the rejection of a conserving ground, this is what's called the ultimate task of modern philosophy, overturning Platonism.
Because Platonism is, at its root, the philosophy that establishes the hierarchy between the original and the copy, the model and the image. It separates the pure idea from its imperfect representations.
And the goal of this modern philosophy is to just tear down that whole hierarchy.
To destroy it completely.
And the weapon for this destruction is the simulacrum. Let's do a full concept decoder on this because it feels like the big payoff.
The simulacrum is the ultimate weapon. A simulacrum is not just a bad copy. It is an image or a copy that is so effective, so self-sufficient, that it no longer needs an original or a model to justify its existence.
It's the act by which the very idea of a privileged model is overturned.
The sources define it as the instance which includes a difference within itself, all resemblance abolished so that one can no longer point to the existence of an original and a copy.
And this is the practical result of the eternal return's power. It creates a kind of universal ungrounding.
Yes. When the eternal return is affirmed in its full power, it swallows up or destroys every ground that would let us distinguish an original from a copy. Everything becomes a simulacrum. The ultimate goal for anything is to become its own simulacrum, to reach that status of a fully self-sufficient sign in the coherence of eternal return.
It's a world where the only identity is the identity of difference itself, always in the process of becoming.
We started this whole journey by rejecting the flat, two-dimensional opposition of organic representation, the kind that only sees difference on the surface.
And now, in our final section, Differences Question Problem, we finally get to see what true depth really looks like.
We move beyond that false profundity of conflict. Conflict, opposition. They're shallow. There are rough lines cut out of a much more delicate and complex milieu of divergences and intensities.
They are flat surfaces.
Hmm.
But true difference requires an original intent of depth.
A depth made of overlapping perspectives, potentials, networks of intensity. It's not about simple polarities.
And this means we have to go back to Plato, but read him in a completely new way. The sources suggest that Plato's famous method of division wasn't actually about creating fixed categories.
No, the Platonic division was a rigorous method of selection among rivals. It was a method of authentication. Plato was always trying to distinguish the true claimant from the false one, the true philosopher from the sophist, the true king from the tyrant.
The original from the simulacra.
Exactly. The division was a grounding test. It was used to measure who was worthy of sustaining the idea.
And this need for a grounding test is what forces Plato to introduce myth.
Myth isn't a flaw in his logic. It's an essential part of the structure. Myths, with their circular patterns, like the eternally recurring transmigration of souls, provide the circular model of foundation that's needed. The myth provides the ground that can make the difference and measure the claims.
And this focus on the idea as the measure for selection leads to the ultimate revelation about being in Plato.
In this new reading, the idea isn't some positive essence. It corresponds to the essence of the problem or the question itself. Being is not positive reality, nor is it the ground of negation. It is non-being.
But a non-being that isn't the negative.
It's the being of the problematic. It's the essence of difference itself. Plato's heteron, otherness, is what matters, not his enantian, opposition. This is the ontological opening that relates being and the question.
So difference is the fundamental structure of the question of existence. It's the intensity that drives things, not just what's left over after we negate something. That feels like the true depth we were searching for.
And you can connect this problematic structure directly to Heidegger's thought. For Heidegger, the not isn't simple negation, it's the ontological difference, the fold, the Zweifalt between being and beings. And that fold is fundamentally about questioning.
And for thought to even be able to grasp this difference, the thinking subject, the self, also has to dissolve its own fixed identity.
Absolutely. Nietzsche's Death of God demanded the dissolution of the I. And our sources point to this explosive moment in Kant, where the thinking I is shown to include a fundamental receptivity to the world, an alienation in principle. The I is already an other.
The schizophrenia in principle.
Is argued to be the highest power of thought. It opens being directly onto difference, bypassing all the mediators of representation.
So if the ultimate reality is this unmediated, intensive difference, how do we experience it? It can't be through logic alone.
It has to be through the senses. This is why the ultimate form of knowledge is called transcendental empiricism. A true science of the sensible doesn't capture what can be represented, stable forms, but what can only be sensed. Difference, potential difference, intensity.
The intense world of differences is the object of this superior empiricism,
It's the only way to genuinely grasp the disparate.
which makes the modern work of art, something like James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake or Mallarmé's book, inherently philosophical acts.
They are problematic structures by nature. They move beyond representation. They dissolve the identity of the object by embracing divergent series, and they dissolve the identity of the subject by embracing decentered circles. They affirm divergence and decentering.
And the ultimate unit of measure for this affirmation is the disparate.
A difference of difference as the immediate element of pure presence, the coherence found in chaos.
We started by trying to liberate difference from its shackles, and we end here with the understanding that difference is liberation. This whole journey is just perfectly summed up by that line from the poet Blood.
It's the profession of faith for this entire philosophy. The same returns not, save to bring the different.
The identity that returns is just the identity of the ongoing process of becoming different.
That's it.
This has been a monumental exploration. We've moved from the suffocating conservatism of organic representation to a world affirmed by univocity, nomadic distribution, and the disruptive power of the simulacrum.
The core drama was that struggle between domesticated difference and wild difference. And the mechanism of victory was that categorical reversal, where identity becomes a secondary power that just orbits and affirms difference.
And to give this whole thing a modern analogy, something to really make it stick, think about AI image generation, specifically latent diffusion models.
Okay.
Organic representation is the old model, a fixed labeled data set, cats, dogs, chairs. If you ask for a new image, it just averages what it already knows. It sticks to resemblance and opposition.
But the philosophy of pure difference is the latent diffusion model. The process starts with pure, unmediated noise, chaos. The disparate, the generative power is in that initial chaos, which the algorithm then affirms over and over again.
That affirmation is the univocal being. It's the eternal return in practice.
And the resulting image is the simulacrum. It's singular, it's expressive, and it has no fixed original model. It's just the determined realization of inherent difference and intensity.
It leaps over the boundaries of its training data to create something genuinely new, just by affirming chaotic potential. And with that, we have to revisit that mic drop quote one last time. The same returns not, save to bring the different.
And that phrase should really resonate with you. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it's about changing how you see the world moving.
We've shown that the ultimate goal isn't to solve problems or resolve conflicts. Those are just flat surfaces. But to grasp the being of the question itself. The tension and potential in the problem is more real than any answer.
So I'd challenge you to consider how your own daily categorizations, the generic concepts, the fixed identities you rely on at work, in your relationships, how they might be acting as that terrifying conservatism that Hegel perfected.
Are you eliminating the possibility of true creation?
Are you choosing manageable resemblance over genuine transformation? The real experience, the true depth, lies in affirming the disparate as your immediate element. That is where new thought and real novelty can begin.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.